Well, Washington was quite correct in that war is entirely the most expensive thing a government can do. And it was the kind of thing that this government could not afford to do. He thought it would be a disaster in terms of its domestic impact, and that he thought internationally it could be quite dire, but dire enough to destroy the experiment. That defeat in a war with Britain or France was a quick avenue to the end, to the conclusion of everything. Nothing else would follow. So he was committed from the outset to avoid that for all of its potential consequences and ramifications. It's interesting because neutrality was a question that came about in a way that we wouldn't think of. There was a good deal of consideration that the executive had no right to issue a proclamation of neutrality any more than he had a right to declare war. This was a congressional prerogative. And there was, this is one of the first fissures that begins to appear in the Jefferson, Madison, Washington dynamic, that Madison was quite troubled by this. And Jefferson was as well, so much so that he managed to excise the word from the proclamation, so that it's technically not a neutrality proclamation. It's a non-involvement, we're standing away proclamation. And that was a semantical concession that some people were not happy about. Hamilton wasn't, because he thought that it was quite disruptive to Anglo-American relations, and he was highly intent on that because of the financial benefits that would come from having Britain be the principal trading partner.
But that's also one of the reasons why Washington, in fact, he was here. He was at Mount Vernon when he received word that Great Britain and France were then officially at war, and that it seriously depressed him as well as alarmed him. Because if they were at war, of course, a lot of the fighting they were going to be doing was going to be on the seas, and that would certainly disrupt American trade, and that was something that Hamilton, of course, was concerned about as well, because the customs duties were one of the major sources of income for the country at this time, and so that would undoubtedly cut down on those duties. And so Washington did rush back to Philadelphia once he had heard about the war, and then that's when they started hashing out the so-called Neutrality Proclamation, because they did want both sides, both the British and the French, to realize, okay, we're not part of this, so don't bother our ships. Let them continue doing what they're doing, so that we can bring in the goods and collect the customs duties. And that's before Edmund Jeanne has even made it to Philadelphia. He landed in Charleston and then made his, ironically, kind of royal progress up to Philadelphia. So this was partly getting ready for him, how they were going to deal with him. Hamilton even suggested that since he was the emissary of Republican France, that we should not even perhaps even receive him, because we had made our diplomatic arrangements with the King of France, who, of course, by the time Jeanne arrived, the king was no more. But at least Jefferson did win that point, and Washington did receive Jeanne, and then, of course, things went downhill from there. After that first meeting, Washington was never going to like Jeanne the whole time he was here, and things only went from bad to worse.
Yes. Britain took its sweet time sending someone. There was a long period where we had nobody representing the Court of St. James here in the country, except for quite unofficial. We had some consular people, and George Beckwith, who was a spy, who came down from Canada periodically and had tea with Hamilton. But the appointment of a man to actually come here from London in the ministerial role took them quite some time. And then when they did send someone, it was a child, a completely inexperienced diplomat who knew Thomas Jefferson quite casually from their residence in Paris together at some point when George Hammond, the young man, was in residence there as a junior diplomat. And he actually seems to have thought that that casual acquaintance would smooth the way. It didn't. Jefferson was a completely different man as Secretary of State, who was not any more prepared to give George Hammond any favors as he was any of the others. Jeanne was a bit different, but Jeanne wore out his welcome within weeks. He was a disaster.